I'm fine. Yeah.
All right. All right, so with the overview of EVT, what electronic verification of time is that it allows you to essentially electronically sign a timesheet for the users. The supervisors then can review that timesheet and verify that they've looked at it and say that it's all correct. So what I'm going to walk through here first is an overview of how that works. It's a pretty simple process for the user. It's a little bit more complicated for the supervisors, but certainly not too difficult. One thing that I want to mention, when you do enable EVT, I'm going to be using my demo site for this. So it's going to be a little bit different from your site. But when you do enable EVT, you should see, if you compare this to your site, it will have these additional things down here telling about how many hours are expected for pay periods. And once the hours are done for the pay periods, it will give you a confirm link here for the user to say, yes, this is accurate and correct. And there's also a verify link down here if you have permission as a supervisor to verify time. This is a user role permission. Typical users will not see the verify link. Only those users that have the permission to verify will see that. Also, we may have on your actions menu a new EVT sediment where you'll be able to see those same links, confirm and verify. The nice thing about this confirm link is that it will not appear until the requisite hours are met for the pay period in LegalServer, and then it will show up here on the left-hand side. But occasionally people do need to confirm even though it's not they haven't met the requisite hours, and so some agencies like it over here on the left in the actions menu as well. You will enter your time just as you would typically in LegalServer. You would just go to actions and go to like add case time. This will be your case time slip where you can configure this to get whatever information you want with the time. Here, because it's a case time slip, it's asking for a case. I can search for that case, etc., and then put it in. Or I have this ones that I've accessed recently over here on the left as well. So I can just click over here and you'll notice that it replaces that. You can put in the time, etc., funding code. I'm not going to go too much over the time slip because that's something that hopefully you already are familiar with, although I will be talking about some additional settings on the time slip that you'll want to use. Then you can also put in, of course, the spent time. So I'll put in, whatever hours I want for today. Saying I've done this, I have to pick my activity code. So let's say I was doing a deposition on this case. And then I can put in my activity details and case notes. When I save that, that's going to show up on my timekeeping tab as well. Your timekeeping log can be filtered, however, for the entire pay period. So one thing that users can do once they've finished their time for the pay period is actually filter this time log for that pay period. Once you have EVT, you'll have this please select pay period, and you can go through and select the pay period that you want to view. I'm a little bit behind on my demo site, so I'm going to go to September 16th of 2021 because that's the next one that I have filled out. When I filter that, I can see all of my time for that pay period. I can see the total hours for the pay period. And typically what you would normally see on the timekeeping log, I will be able to see here. Supervisors can also filter for the user as well if they wanted to see the time here. The nice thing about this is that it does give you over here on the left-hand side your totals. This is on your regular. This isn't EVT per se, other than the pay period. But you'll be able to see the number of hours per day. You'll be able to see the number of hours by activity type and also by funding code. The user, once they have met their requisite hours, as I mentioned, they'll get this confirm link. All they need to do is click on this confirm link or go to actions and confirm, whichever they want to do. And then it will take them to the confirm time sheet. This, again, will list all of the hours for the pay period. So you'll see the pay period here. My pay periods are a little bit different. They're the 1st through the 15th and the 16th through the end of the month, whereas I think your pay periods are biweekly, but we do have those different pay periods. So it will show you what your pay period is. You'll be able to see the time by activity type as well as sick time, etc., or other leave time. You'll be able to see a total of each day for that day, as well as a subtotal for each of the different activity types. So I can see that I spent 22 hours on case time, 10 hours on at midtime, etc. And then, of course, I get my total hours for the pay period, which is 88 in this particular case. Down below, I can also add, this is optional in your timekeeping settings, but you can add this same total by funding code. It doesn't divide it out by day, but it does give you the total time for the funding code and which funding code has been used. Then as a user, I can come down here and I can say this is all accurate. What I've put in is true. And I can put my check mark in there. That's essentially my electronic signature saying that this is accurate. This language is configurable by you. So this is the default language that we have in LegalServer, but you can change it to any language that is required by your funders or any other language that you want as an agency to have this day what it is. Once I do put that check mark in, I can come over here and confirm my time. If I don't have that check mark in here and I try to confirm my time, it's going to give me an error. So you'll notice that I got this error. I have to acknowledge that it's accurate. So I do have to put in that. That's, again, my electronic signature, essentially. And then when I confirm my time, I will see here, you'll notice that the system has recorded that it was confirmed, who confirmed it, and what date and time I confirmed it as well. So that's the process for the typical user, and then that's all they really have to do. When they go back to their timekeeping tab, they will see their next pay period. I have time finished for my April 16th through the 2022nd, so I'm getting that confirm link now. But again, you definitely want to do that for times. The other thing that you'll see here on the left-hand side is how many hours are remaining for the pay period. And again, typically you're seeing a lot here because of my demo site, but typically you'll only see one for the current pay period that they'll see, you have 88 hours left or you have 48 hours left in the pay period. The other thing that you'll see on your timekeeping tab that is different in EVT is your My Time. So with My Time on the typical site, it just gives you the hours for the day. And here it is telling my hours from the day. But if I put my mouse over it, once EVT is enabled, you will actually see the entire pay period. And you'll be able to see the number of hours per day here, et cetera, as well. You'll see any warnings, like the fact that I haven't confirmed my time for this certain pay period. It will tell me how many hours I have left, et cetera. And then, of course, I have some additional ones, such as verify time, et cetera, since I have that right to do that.
Craig, so sorry to cut in, but it shows that you still have hours remaining on the previous pay period as well, right?
Correct. It does. Right? Yes. Yep.
Okay.
So if I haven't met my hours for the previous pay period, it would tell me that as well. So that's the
and Craig, where does the 88 come from? Is that preset based on the assumption like 100 hours is the right amount? Like what is the 88 based on?
Yeah, great question. So that's going to be in your timekeeping settings. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but it's set by, in the timekeeping settings, you put in the hours per day that are expected from staff, exempt and non-exempt staff. And then you also, for each user, have to set a FTE percentage. And so how that requisite hours is calculated is it looks at the hours per day, then it times that by the FTE percentage of the staff. So if the hours per day, of course, is 8 and I'm 100%, then it's going to use that 8 hours per day. Then it's going to multiply that by the number of days, working days in the pay period, which is Monday through Friday in LegalServer. So any day for Monday through Friday in the pay period, it's going to calculate it there. So for instance, in this case, in my time, you can see I have 11 days in this pay period for me. So it's calculating my requisite hours as 88 hours because I have 8 hours per day there and I have 100% FTE. But those are the 3 things that it looks at to calculate that requisite hours.
So we
does it need to be does it need to be based on 8, or can you do it based on 7, for example?
Yeah, you get to put that in your timekeeping settings, so you can put 7, 7.5, okay, whatever it happens to be for your agency. Yep.
So okay, we set that, like our administrators, our super
Correct.
users. Okay.
Yep. And we'll get there specifically and talk about the settings, so you'll see where to set that as well. All right. The next step of EVT is verification. Of course, only usually supervisors are the ones that are doing the verification. If I am a supervisor and I have the ability to verify, then I'll be able to see that verification here on the left-hand side as well. In order for me to get to that verification, I just have to click here. Again, we've added it to the actions menu as well. So if I wanted to get to it here, I could do that as well. The nice thing about this one is it actually leads you to the direct pay period that needs to be verified. So again, because I'm a little bit behind on my demo site, it's pointing to the September 16th through the 30th, 2021. But again, generally it'll be pointing to the just recently ended pay period or the current pay period if the other one's already verified. So as a supervisor, I would come here to that verify link and I get to the verification page. By default, you'll notice that there's a filter on this list view so that it's only looking at the time slips that I supervise. I added myself as a supervisor for IV. So I can see here the number of hours that he worked, the ones that are requisite there as well. So as a supervisor, I can see the requisite hours, and I can also see the total hours that he put in. I can see that time divided by work time, overtime, and leave time. If I'm not exempt, I happen to be exempt in this system, so it's saying overtime is NA. But it would calculate that, and again, that's going to be set. Your overtime settings and calculations are going to be set on your timekeeping settings, and we'll go over those in a minute. And then your leave is also personal to you, so you set up your leave type in your activity types. And then you will be able to track whatever leave you have. So you're not limited to just the 4 I have here on my demo site. Whatever type of leave you have will be listed here once you set that up in your activity types. As a supervisor, I have the ability to get to that time and attendance record as well. I'm going to open it up in a new tab just so I don't lose my page. But as a supervisor, again, I can see that same information that the user saw. I can see their time by day, etc., and their funding code if that's something that you enable. I can see when it was confirmed as well to make sure that it's confirmed. So I can see that information. I can also go in and see the specific time slips as well. I can either click on total hours or on the name. The total hours will just give me a list of the time slips and that. If I click on the name, however, it gives me the time slips, but also gives me the ability to question if you want to use the questioning ability in EVT. So when I see this, I can see again all of the time slips that are there for the pay period. I can see the total time. This gives me again some basic information about this. So I can see the funding code on each of the time slips. I can see the activity code, etc. If I wanted to sort these, I could do that. So anything that's a black where my mouse turns to a hand, I can change the sort. So I can sort it by day, I can sort it by funding code, etc. I can also get to the time slip. So if I actually want to see the time slip and get the additional information that might be on the time slip that I don't see on the list view, I can actually see that time slip as well. If the funding is incorrect and I don't want to send it back to the user to do that, I actually have the ability if, again, under the user permissions, if you've given me that ability to edit this and change the funding code. But you don't necessarily need to give supervisors that ability. That is really up to you. So I can see that. If I do think that there's an issue as a supervisor, I can question the time. And to do that, I just click on the time slip that I want to question, and I can do multiple if I want. So I can question more than one. But let's say I just want to question this one here. I click on it and then I hit question. As a supervisor, it will ask me what's my question. So I can then put in the question. I can say you took 11 hours, but should only have 10 or 8 or whatever it is. 8 per day type of thing. You'll notice there is a response that's not hot here because as a supervisor, I'm not going to see the response, but the user will see the response and the question will actually be read-only so that they can't do that. And then
wait,
I also...
Sorry, Craig, sorry. Can you say that again? The user gets the supervisor's question.
Correct.
She then responds?
Correct.
But did you say the supervisor doesn't see the response?
The supervisor will see the response, it just won't be editable. So I could see if there were a response here, I would see it, gotcha. But it's not going to be an editable box like this one. So sorry for that confusion. Thanks for the clarification. Yeah, so they will actually see the response and then they can resolve it. Once the response is done, I can resolve it as a supervisor. Of course, when I'm first questioning it, I would not want to resolve the question. To save that question, then I would actually click on question. What that does is it automatically unconfirms the time for the user because one of the features of EVT, of course, is that you can lock the time slips. So once the user has confirmed, they can no longer change any of the time slips in the pay period. But if there is a question that the supervisor wants them to change, you'll have to unconfirm that. And that questioning ability does automatically unconfirm that time so that the user can then go in and change the time or do whatever they need to do. If I come back here and refresh this, it's actually not telling me this, but typically it would tell me that, that I've questioned some time. And if I tried to verify this time now, oh, wait, I think I got to the wrong one. Let me go to this one. It took me back to a different one, sorry. So yeah, I can see that I've questioned the time and I can see what time slip it is. And this gives me a link to the time as well. And it gives me the time thing that I did. So as a supervisor, I can see that I've questioned it and that it's still unresolved. The user then will also get a notice on their homepage. On the homepage, if you set this up for timekeeping alerts, I don't have, because it's not my time slip, I'm not seeing it, but there will be a time slip here saying that you have an unresolved question. It will also actually show up on the My Time. So the unresolved questions will show up here as well with a link to that time slip that's there. I have that user actually open on another time thing. So I'm going to actually come over to theirs and I'm going to go to that question time. I need to refresh it so that I can answer it so you can see what that looks like as well. And it hasn't shown up yet, unfortunately. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, just so you know, there's a little bit of a delay sometimes on that notice that there's question time. It's not always immediately there, but it will get there eventually. So let me go back to the verification screen here. And I'm just going to get the link for that so I can copy that link to the other page so I can make sure I get the right one. And essentially what the person will see is that question. Then they can put in a response and they can say, you know, it's fixed or whatever they want to do on that. So I am changing that time slip right now on the other end. And then I'll be saving it here as well. So now that that's saved on their end, they do have to go back in and confirm their time. And so now if I go to that verification screen and I refresh because things have changed, I will not only see that they have a question, but eventually I'll also see that it's unconfirmed. If I go to verify this, I'll also see, oh, sorry. Yeah, it's the right one. If I go to verify this, I also see that question. And so I can go back to that question time slip here. And I'll be able to go in and look at it. And I can also edit it here. And then I'll be able to see that the response is that it was fixed. And I can say that it's resolved. And I can put in the date it was resolved as well as any resolution notes that I want as well. If this is important, this is an important step if you do use the questioning ability in LegalServer, because that questioned alert will stay there until it's resolved. So if the supervisor forgets to resolve the question, and now it's 3 pay periods later, the user is still going to have, you have an unresolved question. And so we want to make sure that that does get happening. If you do use the questioning ability, you do want to make sure that you get it as well. Again, when I refresh this, I'm going to see, again, those unresolved questions. So I can, again, go to that as well. So I can see it here or on that other screen as well. Once I hit continue here to save this time slip again with that resolved question, now when I go back to that verification screen, it should say that it's resolved. I should no longer get the warning that there's not there. You'll notice that it is now telling me that I have the question, it was resolved, but the confirmation is still required. Unfortunately, you know, I don't know, it's unfortunate, but you do have to unconfirm in order to be able to edit times if you have that lock on. And so when the user does answer the question and it gets resolved, it needs to be reconfirmed. Typically what happens is you have the user fix the issues, send back that it's been fixed, and then just reconfirm. So the supervisor doesn't have to wait for them to reconfirm or do that. But some agencies wait for the supervisor to resolve it, and then the supervisor says, okay, I'm satisfied, go ahead and reconfirm your time. So it's up to you on how you want to do that, but typically it's just confirmed right after it's resolved. So the user would have to go back in and confirm. I will say that the system does allow you to go ahead and verify time that has not been confirmed. So in the instance where somebody has left and they didn't confirm their time before they left, you're still going to be able to verify that time and everything's going to be okay with that. So, but it does give you those warnings there. I've gone into that other user now and reconfirmed the time. And so now you'll see that the warnings are green. I have no more warnings here. So I can go ahead and verify this time now as a supervisor. Again, I can do more than one if there's more than one here. And then I can just click verify. It will tell me any of those warnings again that I need to see, and then I can click verify. This I have expenses on my site, so you won't get that page, but when you hit back to continue, you can see that. So this verify link is still here, though. You'll notice that even though I've confirmed or verified all of the time I have as a supervisor, this link will stay here until all of the time for the pay period is verified. So that's just something to note, but you'll notice that when I go here, again, I don't have any left here at the top because I've verified all of mine, but mine are down here. So once it's verified, it will show up as verified time. Again, you'll be able to see all that information. I can unverify it if I find a mistake that I missed and need to undo. So I can unverify, and I can also, again, still see that time and attendance record as well.
Craig, sorry to interrupt. Can you say everything you just said? Sorry. Why did it still say verify time if the supervisor had already verified time?
Because there's other time. So if I get rid of that filter, you'll notice there's another time sheet here that needs to be verified, where Ivy is the supervisor for that. So that link is not supervisor specific. It's just, it will show up until all the time in the pay period is verified, and then it will go to the next pay period.
So everyone's going to see that that link is still live, even though they, individual supervisors, have verified all their supervisees' time?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. And then, you know, once it is done, I'm going to go in. Typically, you don't, of course, verify your own time, but I'm going to go ahead and verify this so that they'll both show up here at the bottom. And you'll notice now that when I go back to my timekeeping tab, the verify time has switched to the next time. So it does switch to the next time, but you'll always see a verify link either for the previous time, etc. So it's just always there if you have rights to verify. It's just depending on which time thing it is. And that's essentially how it works for the supervisor and how verifying time and questioning time works. So let me pause just for some additional questions in case you have any on the overall process, and then we'll get into the actual settings that you need to set up in order for this to work.
So only the supervisor, we have to designate who the supervisors for timekeeping are, will be able to access the approval function. It's not going to show up to all staff, right?
Correct. That's a user role permission. So it was based upon user role. All right, so let's talk about your settings. The first thing that I want to let you know is I mentioned this when I was talking about leave time. Leave time is going to be set up as an activity type. So the first thing that you'll want to do is make sure that all of your activity types have a timekeeping category. This is generally not required, but once EVT is set up, you do need to set up those categories so that you can do that. So you're going to want to go to your admin tab, you're going to want to go to your lookups and then look up for your time activity type. I'm just going to type in activity here so
Greg,
that it
I
will
can
come
tell
up.
you, because I'd set this up on our live site, that we have 4 activity types. We have case activity, we have leave activity, we have outreach activity, and other time, which is sort of a catch-all.
Okay.
Does that fit with what you're about to show us?
Yes, except that your other time, if you want your leave to be calculated properly with EVT and set up like it was on mine, you'll actually have to make your leave time activity type as well. So you may have your leave time now as an activity code under your other time, but for EVT to work, your leave time does have to be an activity type.
No, it
so that will
is.
be
There's 4 of them. Each one is an activity type.
okay. Perfect. So one thing that you'll want to do is for those activity types is make sure that they have an activity timekeeping log. So if I click on here, you'll see there's a timekeeping category here. It's not required, so a lot of people don't put that in there, but you do need to have that in there for EVT to function properly. These timekeeping activities are categories that you do not have control over. It's one of the few lookups that you cannot change. But what you need to do is tie this activity type to whatever type of activity category this is. This is other time. So in my system, it's called project time. It might be called other time or other work time on yours, or it might be called project time as well. There's a few differences that I've seen on the different sites. I'm not sure why, but there is some time. But generally what you'll have in this timekeeping activity is case activity. And then you'll have other activity type, work activity type, which is, like I said, project time or that. And then you'll have your leave activities, holiday, other leave, etc. So that's typically what you'll see there. But each of those types do have to be tied to a category. If you're administrator, you probably will have access to this batch edit. And so if there's only 4, it may not be a big deal, but you can actually use this batch edit as well, because the timekeeping category shows up here. And so you can go through and make sure that they all have a timekeeping category there. That's so that EVT can determine whether or not this is work time or leave time or other type of things. So that's an important step that you do need to take if you haven't done it already. The next settings that you'll have to look at is your timekeeping settings. And this is where you set essentially the hours per day that we were talking about. If I just go to the main admin tab and type in timekeeping, you'll get that timekeeping settings option. When you click on that, you'll see your different timekeeping settings. Here's the timekeeping certification message. So this is the message that you can edit for them to see when they're confirming their time. You can also see here that there is an option for other things that you have. These are all typically that you'll have. All of these are timekeeping settings that you already have, so I'm not going to talk about them, but what you'll have added and what is added when you have EVT is this pay period section. Most of these, unfortunately, a lot of this section goes with the full AGM. EVT didn't used to exist. It was all in Advanced Grants Management, and you used to have to buy all of Advanced Grants Management to get this functionality. But enough people wanted it without the full AGM that they broke it out. But the downside is a lot of these settings are still going to be AGM related, so you can essentially ignore them. But the ones that, so I'm going to point out the ones that are important for EVT, and these top 4 are going to be important for EVT. The first one is those hours for non-exempt staff as well as overtime exempt staff. You'll notice I have 8 there, but you can change that to 7 or 7.5 or whatever that happens to be for your organization. I'm going to leave it at 78 would probably not be a good number. And then you also have the ability to do a warning. So if you want your supervisors to get a warning, if somebody puts in, say, more than 10 hours a day, you can set this maximum hours per day before warning to say 10. What happens if you do set that, though, is that anytime there's more than 10 hours in a day, there's going to be a warning in that my time. So up here at my time, when I get up to my time, There will be a warning here that says you worked more than 10 hours on this day. It doesn't prevent you from confirming, it doesn't do anything else, but it does tell people that they did that. And will also be appear for the supervisors, so the supervisors will also see that warning that says they have more than 10 hours per day. Some groups like that because they want to know, they want their supervisors to know if somebody's working excessively on days and that type of thing. But it is not required. You do not have to put that in there. And then you won't get any warnings about that. Of course, as I mentioned on the time and attendance record, in the confirmation link, you'll still be able to see how many hours per day were put in. So some people find the warnings annoying, but they're all or nothing. You can't set warnings for just some people. You set them for all. So that's how you would do that. The multiplier for overtime is important only because it's required. EVT doesn't do any multiplication for overtime hours, etc. But most people it's 1.5, and since it's required, you do have to fill that in as well. There's also a number of hours of comp time allowed per week. Comp time as defined by LegalServer is the number of hours between your requisite hours and your overtime hours. So let's say, for instance, that you have a 7.5 hour day instead of an 8 hour day, but you don't have overtime until it's 40 hours. So the requisite hours for a week would be 37.5, but you don't get overtime until you go more than 40 hours. So in that particular case, the comp time hours would be like 2.5, right? The difference between the 40 hours and the 37.5 hours. This is just to help LegalServer be able to calculate which hours are actually overtime hours versus which hours are not overtime hours. So that's also important for you to do, and it's also required. So yeah, you can't get away without doing that. The other ones that you have
Can you just circle back to that? We can't leave the comp time thing can't be left blank. Like, how does that
correct?
come up?
But you can put a 0 in there if it's 0, right? So, but you do have to have a number in there because it's required. It won't let you save it without it.
All right, I guess we just have to think about this. The way it works here,
Yeah, flex.
people just don't work overtime, and it's like they can't do it without prior permission. So it basically never comes up, and if it does, it's a problem. So we don't want to have this system set up in a way that people think they could start working overtime and get paid for it. So I don't know. We'll look at it. I just and I don't know. I don't remember what the whole layout looks like when somebody's entering time. If it's going to like feel like inviting them to work overtime, and that's not the way it works here.
Yeah, it shouldn't. I mean, as long as they're clear on the fact that they should be working more than 40 hours, that's really nice because on the My Time, you can see that here. So they can see their work week and they can, top it off at 40. So they can say, I'm not going to work more than 40 hours. What the system does is on that verification screen, if I go back to that verification screen, the verification screen does divide it between overtime and regular time. So supervisors will be able to see based upon the settings of whether or not that user has worked overtime. And again, if they're not supposed to and they didn't get permission, then you would be able to see that, and they would, you'd be able to see that they have more than 40 hours in a work week of work time in their system. So it's just another way for you to get an idea as a supervisor that maybe this person has overtime who shouldn't or whatever. So.
Can
Greg,
supervisors look at these timesheets like before it's confirmed by the employee? Can supervisors buzz in any old time to look at timesheets? Or they have to wait for the employee to confirm? They can.
Yep, nope, they'll be able to see it even as the total hours are going in. So maybe they've only, it's only been 2 days, so only 14 hours are in here. They can still come in here and see those 14 hours and see, what it looks like.
We had this whole other thing internally, Craig. You don't have to worry about called flex time that I have no idea if it's going to work in this system, folks. I mean, there's no way to account for flex time anymore that I can see.
Yeah, many organizations do have flex time, but that's something that you have to record outside of LegalServer. So, it's unfortunately LegalServer doesn't say this amount of hours is your flex time. So you would have to, keep track of that outside of LegalServer as you're doing it, but you could still have a time slip for flex time or whatever. So
Our flex time may be different from what other folks consider
Yeah.
flex time. Right?
correct.
I mean, our
Right.
flex time is time that's worked outside the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. So if you work at 10 at night, that's considered flex time. I'm wondering if the overtime, since we don't have overtime, would it be possible to use the overtime category to
Yeah,
cap
for
flex
homes.
time?
Right.
You know,
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I'll show you the overtime, how it's calculated, but I don't think based upon what you've described that
well,
it's going to be able to calculate that.
yeah, the idea being that you're not supposed to work more than 20% of your hours outside that time frame, outside the normal, 8 to 6 Monday through Friday,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So it becomes a percentage of your work time, and if it's within 20%, you're fine. If it's above 20%, you would need permission.
Yeah, you'll have to experiment with that and see if that would work with your policies. But again, I can show you how it's calculated, and then you can see if that would work with your policies. So.
And we don't have this turned on in our live site yet, I believe, right?
Correct. It is in your demo site though, so you can start playing with it in your demo
for
site.
sure. Yep.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to mention was this unallocated time for exempt employee. If you have an exempt employee that is supposed to work, let's say 40 hours a week, but they only, and that let's also say that your pay period is in that week as well. But let's say they only work 30 hours that week as an exempt employee, then you can have the system create what's called unallocated time for the additional 10 hours that is requisite. Typically, this is set to no. Most agencies don't do that. They want to actually see just the actual time, and they don't want the system to create time for their users. So, but that's another important function that you'll want to think about as far as EVT goes and how you want the system to do that. And then the other one is going to be the holiday time calculated in comp time. That's mainly because of the overtime calculation. But here's where the overtime calculation is. And you can see that the overtime calculation uses those timekeeping categories, which is why it's important for those activity types to have a category attached. One of the reasons why it's important. And which of those categories count towards the calculation in overtime. You can set it for the work week or the day, but it's really just the number of hours per day. So typically it's 40 hours per work week. Again, that's going to be in that, and it's going to be just that time. So if somebody takes sick leave, of course, it's not going to be included in that overtime calculation. So you'll want to look at that as well. And then the other
And that
one
wouldn't be possible to select in work period or timesheet period?
Nope, it only does work week and day.
Okay.
And then here's where you can display that funding code breakdown on that confirmation page or the time and attendance record. If you don't want that funding code breakdown, you can flip this to no, and then it won't show up on that confirmation page. But if you do want it, you can have it say yes there. So those are the timekeeping ones that are important for you to think about and set up for your EVT in order for those requisite hours to work correctly. The next set of settings is on the user. So when we do enable EVT, and on your demo site, you should see that as well. When you go into a user profile, so I've just gone to users and gone into a user, we will add this add edit EVT information form on here. And this is where you need to put in whether or not the person is going to be excluded from the pay period process. So by default, that is no, but oftentimes agencies have like volunteers that put in time, but that you don't want to have verified, et cetera, and confirmed. And in that case, you would want to come in and exclude the user from the pay period process. So that's really mainly for volunteers, pro bono attorneys, or whatever. If you have them use time and add in time, but don't want them to go through this EVT process, just say exclude them from the process, and then you can hit continue. And they will not show up on the verify screen for the supervisors to review. The other thing that you want to make sure you do is add the FTE percentage. When I click on this, you can see that I have the ability to do this by pay period. It's not clear, so I like to make clear that the beginning of this FTE percentage and the end of this FTE percentage has to coincide with the pay period, because that's what EVT uses to do the requisite hours for the pay period. So if a person switched EVT or FTE percentages in the middle of a pay period, you would have to figure out the average FTE for the pay period itself. So let's say I have a 2-week pay period. I work 100% of the time for the first week of the pay period, but only 50. I go to 50% for the next week of the pay period, and then 50% from there. What you would have to do is add a thing for that one pay period that says the FTE percentage is 75%, and then you would have that 100 for the previous ones, the 75 for that interim pay period, and then 50 for the ones following that. So it does require that you do that. This is also pay period specific, so that's just something to remember as well for the FTE percentage. And it does start at the beginning of a pay period.
But Craig, assume most of our people are 100% FTE, and that will never change. Does this have to be set for every person for every pay period?
Nope, you only have to set it once. So you can see here, I could set it for 7/1/2021 and leave an end date, and it will be at 100% until I change it. So you only have to put it in once. If they never change, you never have to worry about it again. It's only if they change FTE percentage that you have to change it.
And the way you do that default is just leave the end date blank. The
Correct.
MMD. Okay.
Yep, you would leave the end date blank. So you know, if I didn't want this person to be 50%, you know, as you can see, it's blank right now, right? So I could add in another one. If I do add in another one, this end date has to be the end of the pay period, and this one has to be the beginning of the next pay period. But this just keeps a log so that EVT knows, you know, what pay period it's finalizing or verifying, and so it knows what to use. But just leave it blank, and then you don't have to do it again. Yep. The same is true for the exempt status. So again, you'll need to set an exempt status for every one. If you don't use overtime, I suppose you could make everybody exempt, and then the system just won't calculate overtime. So that is one way around the overtime calculation, is just making people exempt. Overtime, of course, is only calculated for those people who are not exempt. So your options here are exempt, exempt manager, and non-exempt. And so those are the three that you have. These two, of course, doesn't calculate overtime, whereas non-exempt would calculate the overtime. Again, you'll want to set that because EVT needs to know whether they're exempt or not, and which hours to use. On your timekeeping settings, you notice there was an hours per day for exempt employees and hours per day for non-exempt employees, because sometimes that's different for agencies, and that's why they're separate. But you would want to set that. And then the last thing that you'll want to set if you want to use it is that supervisor. So this is where you can set a supervisor for each person. And that's what helps narrow that list on the verification. If there's no supervisor set, if I have the verification link and I'm not a supervisor, I'll just see the full list of all of the time that needs to be verified, as opposed to having it limited by default to just the ones that I verify. So those are the 4 things that you'll want to think about as far as the user settings go.
So if we don't want somebody to have any option to do overtime, we could mark them as exempt, or no?
If you mark them as exempt, then the system will always say overtime is NA, so it will never calculate overtime for them. Correct.
And is it possible to change the supervisor via like a batch for a group of users?
Unfortunately, there is not, but there is.
Okay, that's fine.
This block does have the ability to go the reverse. So you can set it to be, this is who the supervisor is, or you can set it to say this person supervises these people. If you do set it the other way, so in this particular case, when I show this, you'll notice there is this ability to add additional ones. You do want to make sure the block is set properly, but you do have the ability of going to the person who supervises people and just adding in bulk all 5 of the people that they supervise, as opposed to doing it individually. So if you choose to do that, you can use that block that way as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, thanks, Craig.
Yeah.
Now that I've seen this back end, from the point of view of the supervisor, who's our supervisor, people who approve timesheets are, they're going to be doing dozens of them. Is there an expedited way that they can get a list of all their supervisees, or do they have to actually search for each one individually?
No, so you can also add this block to the homepage of this user profile, and it's not on mine, but you can add supervisees or whatever, and then they could see that there. And again, if you use that block in the reverse, then you could add in all 12 supervisees that they have, so that you only have to enter it on one person's profile instead of everybody's profile. So it's a little bit flexible. On the help page, we'll talk about that supervisor block a little bit more. But if you have questions in setting it up, you can just ask, support, or you can send me an email as well, and I can help you do that. But if they want to see the supervisees when they go to verify, of course, if this is set up, they will only see the list of the people that they are attached as supervisors for, and so they'll see their list that way as well.
So there's like a list view for those that they can access all in one place.
Correct. This verify screen, you'll notice it says supervisor equals LegalServer. So if I'm set up as a supervisor of more than one person, all 5 of these people will show up, or 6 or 7, however many there are, and they'll show up here on this list. So I'll just be able to see their verifications by default. Does that make sense? Did that answer that question?
Yes, I guess I just need to see it in action.
Okay. So the next setting that I want to talk about is just those user permissions. So again, if we're on users, you go to your actions and your user roles. I'm just going to go to the administrator role, but you'll want to have one set up for your users as well. There's a couple of permissions that you have that will be added when you have EVT. Then this is one of them: the adding, editing, confirmed time slips, verified time slips, etc. This is typically not set. Usually when we enable EVT, we do go and mark these for all of the user roles so that it doesn't interfere with your prior pay period if you're entering time in a prior pay period and locking it down, so people can't add it. But then you can go in and remove these permissions so that people cannot change their time slips. So this overrides that lock on the time slip if you want to do that. There's also a verify permission, and I usually find that just by hitting, the find button and then typing in verify. And I have to spell it correctly for it to find it. But then I can go through and find the verified time slips. This is the one that you need for the supervisors in order to be able to verify those time slips and see that verification link. And then also there's a question time permission as well. So if I type in question, can't apparently type correctly here. You'll notice there's a resolve time slip question. So again, supervisors would need to have that permission. You actually have the ability to have the same user resolve their own time slip. Most agencies don't use this, but there's a couple that wanted it. So you have those too. So typically supervisors would have the resolve time slip questions. Typically the resolve own time slip question would not be given, but you can give it to them and then they would be able to resolve their own question time. And so those are the user permissions typically that you'll want to look at for your different user roles. And then finally, there's some timekeeping slip changes that you'll have on your time slip when we enable EVT. And so again, if you compare the time slip that you see on the back end from your demo site and your live site, you'll be able to see some of those differences since it hasn't been enabled. One of the main differences is you have this contract term allocation instead of funding code. This is the funding code block. It gets replaced for EVT with contract term allocations. Again, the reason for that is because this used to be part of full AGM, and AGM uses contract term allocations. EVT doesn't use contract term allocations except for this. So you do need to have that contract term allocations block on instead of the funding code. It does typically get replaced automatically when we enable EVT. The other thing that you'll see is you'll have this date of service with lock date. This block will have an additional lock pay period on verification, distribution, and post. Again, usually on live, when we first enable it, we uncheck this so that you don't have issues with putting in time for your prior pay period before EVT was there. If you're not entering time in prior pay periods yet, then this won't be a problem. But if you are entering time, then we'll have to uncheck that. And then when you're ready, you can go back and check that to be able to lock that time. So they can't change it when they confirm.
In the contract term allocations, is that replacing the funding code that we've
Yes.
already, that which pulls in the funders that have been put in grants management?
Correct. Yep.
Will we need to create another pick list for that?
No, it will happen automatically.
Okay.
And then you'll see a couple of other additional things that I've added to this one that are, again, not necessarily required, but generally just help EVT run a little bit more smoothly. Branch is the big one. Most agencies only have one branch. And I think we've probably gotten through most of the errors that happen with EVT if there's not a branch set. But just to be more than safe, I put it on the time slips, default it and hide it to say, there's no branch or main branch, whatever it happens to be. And so that they get set on the time slip, as well as program and office. Again, not as important for EVT as it is for HEM, but because that's just built into the system, even if you don't want to ask the office and program, you can again set it and de-hide it. So that's what I've done here. So those are there. And then the final one is this pay period distribution post lock. And again, that in connection with this will lock down the pay period. So again, typically we remove this and put it in the disabled section when we first enable EVT on the live site so that you don't have issues with your past pay periods. But so it will be up to you to put that back on when you want those to be locked. But these are the two between that date of service with lock date and that pay period confirmation lock. That's what locks down the time slip when it's confirmed. The other thing, if you want to use the questioning ability, is this branch logic. So this is the branch logic that allows them to see the question and respond to the question, etc. Again, it's hidden by default because it will only show up if there is a question time slip. But then when you edit it, it will show up as a question time slip and they can respond. So if you want to use the questioning ability, you also need that. So those are the settings that are required for EVT. So any questions on the general overview and on the settings that are required for EVT to work? And if
So
not,
I'm
then
looking at the live site and I'm in the timekeeping and grant management section as an administrator. And so I'm looking where you would go in to do the settings. And I see something that's called timekeeping settings, but it doesn't match what you have. And that is because what you've been showing us, is that because we don't have EVT turned on? But is that where I would find it?
correct. Yep.
Timekeeping settings?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end my part of the recording, and hopefully it doesn't end your part of the recording. So let me go here, and then we can get specifically into things about your agency.